Hey everyone! So this is going to be an experimental video. On social media, I hint at a lot of things that go on in my life, and I never really go into detail, but it's annoying because if I actually tell you guys, you just really understand what's going on. And so I decided to make a whole video where I just kind of dump everything. And not just, stuff that's been happening recently, just also you get to learn about me, my life. I'm gonna start from like elementary school and then go. But this video also serves two purposes, because I'm deciding that if I'm going to dump literally all of my personal trauma to everyone, then I at least want to profit from it. Which is the worst way to say that. How can I reword that? This video is specifically for people who want to support the channel and who can't do it directly like through Patreon, and also want to get an in-depth look into my life, because I'm gonna talk about all of my life. So, after every major tidbit, I'm gonna place a mid-roll ad. I don't know how many mid-roll ads I'm allowed to place. I never tried this before. This is a video where you just put it on the background, you listen, and maybe don't judge me too much, hopefully. And if you heard that and you want to click away, I get it. This video is not for everyone. I get that a lot of you don't come to this channel for me, you come to this channel for nostalgic cartoons. But for those of you who are interested, I'll start. First thing I can tell you is that when I was born, I was a C-section, and I also had the umbilical cord wrapped around my neck like a noose, and I was also jammed under my mom's ribs. And so when they were actually delivering me during childbirth, they would cut me open, and the doctor goes, "Oh crap!" And my mom goes, "What? Is everything okay?" The doctor goes, "Everything's gonna be just fine." Shit. And so when I listen to Nirvana's Heart-Shaped Box, when he has that lyric, it goes something like, "Crawl back into the womb, so I can wrap my umbilical noose." I'm like, hey, I resonate with that in two different ways. Metaphorically and literally. I think the thing that most people don't know about me is that I grew up with severe anger issues. And no, if you look at me now, it's hard to actually tell that because I got better. It's actually an issue that runs in my family. Everyone who was born male on my dad's side of the family has really bad anger issues. My great-grandfather was apparently an awful, abusive person, and my grandfather left to join the Air Force at 16 just to get out of a bad home life. Then he met my grandma, they had two sons, my dad and my uncle, and my papa was better as he got older, but he still wasn't, really good about managing his anger. My dad likes to tell the story about how one time he got my papa so mad that my papa picked him up, which is already a bad sign, but then heard my meek, docile, quiet granny shout from across the room, "Put him down!" And my granny shouting from across the room is enough to put my papa in a frozen state of fear, because she never does that. And he put my dad down, she took him to the other room, and talked some sense into him. And as far as I know, that's the only time that's ever happened. I'm also pretty sure she threatened to divorce him, but they didn't divorce. And I inherited that anger management problem. All through middle school, I was ostracized and pushed away, mostly because, I'd get angry and yell, which would make other kids scared of me, so they would ostracize me more, and I'd be even more alone, which made everything much worse. I hated elementary school. I was miserable all the time. I remember hiding underneath a table one morning while my mom wasn't looking so that I could avoid going to school. I stayed there for hours. She called the cops, she started crying, I waited for the cops to leave until I decided to crawl out and tell her that I just didn't want to go to school that day, and, I had counselors pull me aside from class, along with a lot of other clearly kids having problems. And we talked about weird things. The thing I remember is they asked us a series of questions. I don't know how exactly they worded it, but all of us agreed that we like to wear our hoods up to cover our faces so that we can not be seen by everyone else. We also liked cloudy days because we were sad all the time and it just felt more appropriate. We liked being alone because duh. A lot of things like that. And I remember the counselor asking us if we'd ever thought about killing ourselves. Our answer was all usually, we think about it, but we never actually considered doing it. And little did I know that just considering suicide isn't normal. Turns out I was having suicidal thoughts starting in elementary school and going into middle school. But in 5th grade is when I knew I had a chance to change my crappy conditions in middle school. You see, what my elementary school did is that they'd figure out all the students going to which middle schools, and they would gather them all together into groups, and then they would meet each other and talk so that the elementary school students wouldn't feel alone, and they'd at least know someone when they go to their middle school. And my group was like 5 people. There was so few people in my group, I knew that there was no way I was going to ever really meet them. The only person I actually knew was just a single person I never actually talked to. And this was amazing for me because I knew that I wouldn't have the bad reputation of constantly being the angry kid all the time. And so when I got to middle school, I just stopped talking. I kept my head down and just became the quiet kid. Because I knew that if I opened my mouth, I'd get more angry. I was going to force myself to control my anger whether I liked it or not. Even if it just meant sitting there, being angry, and not doing anything about it. It was better than 5 years of loneliness. And I don't know if that's healthy or not, I'm pretty sure it's not, but I did learn how to control my anger by doing that. Just by learning to not lash out whenever I got angry. And if I'm going to be honest with myself, if I didn't have the opportunity to start over, I probably would have killed myself in middle school. And there were a few key things in middle school that stuck with me during my life. First thing is that I learned I had depression. I never asked a therapist to confirm it for me, but apparently laying down on a bench and feeling numb all over with absolutely nothing you once enjoyed bringing you any happiness anymore is also not normal. And even today I have to deal with some depressive episodes that aren't as bad as that one was. I think that's the only... I think that level of depression happened twice in my life where it got that bad. But I do dissociate quite a lot to this day. It was really weird how one day I was driving, not in middle school, just recently, I was driving, doing errands, feeling great, and then partway through, I'm just like, wow, I don't have any energy to do anything anymore. If I could, I would stop the car and just lay down on the sidewalk. And that was a long time before I actually had an episode like this, and then I went home and just laid down on the floor for several hours. And that's when I realized, oh wait, I know what's happening. This happened to me before. The other most important thing from middle school is that I met one of my best friends. If you're on my Discord, or you've seen some comments in my live streams, you probably see someone who goes by K+8. That's him. In gym class, I saw him playing wall ball by himself, and I was miserable because I didn't have any friends, and I saw he was alone, and I was alone, so I very nervously went up to him and asked, "Can I play with you?" And he looked at his feet and said, "Sure." And because we were the only people we knew, we played wall ball together every day. And not only that, he also had really bad anger management problems. And when that first showed, when he blew up one day, we were in art class, he was sitting next to me, the teacher came up to him and said, "Hey, we have assigned seats, you need to move somewhere else." He argued, "No, I want to sit next to my friend." And she said, "Too bad you have assigned seats." And then he screamed at the top of his lungs, "I want to sit next to my friend." And instead of getting shocked and nervous, I looked at him and went, "Dude, same." Just like, I know what you're going through. And that mostly solidified my want to get better at my anger management issues, because then I could be better, not just for me, but for someone else. So that also helped push me to learn how to control my emotions more. And we're still friends, and we play D&D every Saturday to this day. I am now the DM of our group. He plays a paladin, and he has a lot of skills that I need to figure out how to get around, because he's kind of good, and he's smart, so he knows how to utilize like all of his abilities. And I'm new to DMing, and I'm just making stuff up, so I don't know how to fix this. It's a learning curve for me. And then there was high school, and I actually had a good time in high school. I spent all 4 years downstairs in what we called the dungeon, where the programming classes were. I was sitting next to K+8, every day, so whenever I was struggling with code, I always had his help. I planned to go into college to be a computer science major. During high school, I never went to any dances or events. Whenever there was a school event like that, I would just hang out with my friends, and we actually had a good time. Sometimes whenever there's like a school dance, we'd go to K+8's house and then watch speed runs of video games and just play games together. So like, yes, sad, ooh, boo-hoo. I never had much of a social life in high school, but I was still happier, and I got to spend a lot more time with friends. So in my mind, it was a great time. Little did I know, I had someone inform me, I think it was a senior, that I was one of the popular kids, which hit me pretty hard because I never thought I was. But that's what they told me. It was during high school that I started committing my time to my YouTube channel. I made the channel in middle school, but never actually did anything with it. It was for a project for the National Mill Dog Rescue. So when you look online and you see NMILD Rescue, named after that, that's why I eventually changed it to Negative Legend. And over the course of several years of just that one video being up, I got like 500 subscribers for doing nothing. So I already started off with a base of something to work with. I originally started uploading content around card games, as some of you longtime fans know. Specifically Force of Will. I reached a point where I was becoming disheartened by how Yu-Gi-Oh! Was being managed and was slowly leaving the game. I wanted to be a content creator for Force of Will in hopes that I could help that game not go down the same road. That didn't happen, and I eventually pivoted my whole channel, but we'll get to that part. Eventually, the founder of Force of Will left the game, and now the game is unrecognizable to what it used to be, and when my videos on what happened to Bakugan and what happened to Chaotic blew up, I started changing the direction of the channel into what it is today. And I still have people today asking me to do trading card content, even though I don't have any trading cards anymore. I'm actually in the process of selling all of them during the recording of this video because I don't play trading cards anymore. All of my friends play different card games. I had one friend play Magic. I had one friend play Pokemon. I had another friend play Yu-Gi-Oh! And it's like I had so many cards I could never keep up with the meta for all of them, and I was spending all my money on cards to the point to where I would take my lunch money and just not eat that day so that I had money to buy cards, and it was really unhealthy. And I realized in retrospect that I was using trading cards, in order to ignore my, problems in life. But, everything's 2020 in retrospect, so, at first I just thought I really liked card games. Turns out, nope, I was just really sad. But then came college, and I hated college so much. I didn't even want to go to college. I was forced into it by my parents. And even though they did help me with tuition, I was still racking up debt. And I had heard enough horror stories to know that if I had an unmanageable amount of debt by the time I finished college, I wouldn't have a life afterward. And so there was a lot of crying, again. And I'm not sure if my parents understood how scared I really was. It was during college I put a lot of work into my YouTube channel just because it was something I could do at home, and it was something I understood, and I was starting to make money from it, and I put all the money towards paying off my student loans. I wanted to reduce the amount of interest on my loans as much as possible, and I managed to get it down to $14,000 before my 5th year of college. And I say 5th because I basically lost a year, my freshman year, because it was just that bad. I was that sad all the time. And I even lost my academic scholarship because I was attacked by the fans of Unsleeved Media. And I was being harassed online every day because if you know that guy, you know he's not a good guy. And his fans are the worst, literally the worst people I've ever encountered, and so I became so depressed I couldn't do any work. I failed so many of my classes, and that was the baseline of my entire GPA, and having to bump up my grades was a nightmare, and for my whole life, I was an A-B student, and now it's like, great, now I'm D's and C's, but C's get degrees. At college, you stop caring, unless you're really trying to go for like summa cum laude or something, but just stop caring. Oh my god. So yeah, because my GPA went down, I lost my academic scholarship. It ended up taking me 5 years to earn my business marketing degree instead of 4, and because I eventually realized I wasn't cut out for a computer science degree, so I changed it by the end of my freshman year. I wanted to go in for computer science because I watched Tron Legacy. If you watch my Tron Uprising video, I got some details wrong, but I tell the story about how watching Tron Legacy inspired me to learn programming, even though I was bad at it. And so I wanted to make the grid. I wanted to actually figure out how to program the grid. It never happened. And that is a challenge for someone else. My priorities changed. But luckily, since I spent my whole life, selling trading cards on the secondary market and, tracking how card prices fluctuate, I already had a solid understanding of how all that worked. And so business marketing was so easy. And I was in YouTube. And so I understood social media marketing, and it all just started connecting. And so getting into business marketing was like a perfect fit for me. The second semester of my junior year, later on in my college life, my dad took me to a restaurant for us to have breakfast and have a serious talk. You see, my grandfather had died 4 years prior to stage 4 cancer, and my grandmother was developing Alzheimer's. Both of them lived pretty modest lives, so my grandmother had a good amount of money that had been saved. And my dad wanted to tell me that since I was going to be her only grandchild to graduate college, she wanted to pay off my student loans. We weren't sure how long she had to live and thought it best to accept her offer as soon as possible, especially since my dad and my uncle agreed that if they inherited any money after her death, it would go to my uncle since he had more children that he needed to support. And my grandmother was surprised at how little my student loans were when I got the final number for her, and I had to tell her how much the fear of debt had consumed me during my entire college life. And it was that Christmas when I received the check and finally paid off my student loans. Then 2020 came. It was my senior year. I had only one class to take that year. It started off half online and half in person since people were still trying to gauge how serious the pandemic was. It eventually became entirely online, as you can imagine. During this time, I had already come out to my mom and dad that I wanted to start hormone replacement therapy. And for those of you who don't know what hormone replacement therapy is, because a surprising amount of you don't whenever I talk about it, usually I just refer to it as HRT and just gloss over it. Basically, I'm on testosterone blockers and I'm on estrogen pills. That's when I came out as not fully understanding who I was, but knowing I wasn't happy in the body that I have. And eventually I didn't realize I was non-binary until I talked to some, transgender health therapists, and they're like, yeah, that sounds like non-binary. And I'm like, sure, write that down. Let's go with that for now. Turns out they were dead on the money. My dad was surprisingly accepting of me, and my mom thought I needed therapy, which I get that she said that she wants me to take therapy because it's new and it's scary and it's a big life decision. But at the same time, I was 22 and I knew at this point, it's not like some 15-year-old and it's like, I don't know, that's a big life decision and you're young and there could be just like, I understand the argument in that regard, but even then it's like, you should still probably take them more seriously. And when my mom told me to seek a therapist, I can't tell you how much respect for her I lost that day. But at this point, my relationship with my mom had already been bad enough to where her saying that didn't hurt as much as it probably should have. My mom has the problem of not really showing any remorse for when she hurts someone. All she really cares about is making sure she isn't the one to blame. She would expect us to drop whatever we were doing in order to go help her if she wanted help. This one example that really pushed me over the edge was when she tried to start her own furniture restoration business. And she bought a massive, incredibly heavy dresser without telling any of us that she was going to. And I was in the middle of working on a really stressful assignment that when I was eventually roped into helping her move it, I was about ready to scream. And of course, she doesn't apologize for actually inconveniencing any of us. There's more examples coming up, so don't worry, it gets worse. But back to the point. Now that I had come out to my parents and started HRT, at the beginning of 2020, I started feeling more like myself, and I started posting more pictures and started feeling more pretty, the way I wanted to present myself, more like how I am. That's when people started realizing I gotta glow up because I'm like, I can do all the things I want to. Now I'm not as self-conscious about my body as I used to always be. And for my entire life, I thought I was asexual. It turns out that I had just convinced myself that I was not deserving of love because I hated myself that much. I had given up the idea of being in a happy relationship since middle school. And especially since I didn't understand that I was non-binary, I just repressed all of my emotions so well, I convinced myself I was asexual. Now that I was on HRT in the latter half of college, I started realizing that wasn't the case. It was in 2020. I got a vasectomy because I'm horrified at the idea of accidentally conceiving a child, and I got my first girlfriend, and it went terribly. There was a slew of red flags that I should have picked up on, and even now that I broke up with her, I still have to deal with the fallout since she still tries to contact me several months after I blocked her on all social media, but I won't go into too much detail about that since she doesn't deserve our whole relationship being public on the internet. Just know my first girlfriend is a crazy ex-girlfriend, and she doesn't realize it. I guarantee you she's convincing herself that everything she's doing is completely normal. But it did bring another example of my mom and why we have problems. My mom, for my entire life, would hound me for when I was going to get a girlfriend. And even though I told her how much saying that upset me, she would still persist, and completely disregarding my own feelings. And I understand that it isn't abnormal for moms or parents to do that, especially since she wasn't privy to my body dysmorphia or gender dysphoria, but it still angered me so much that it pushed me to not have a relationship solely just to spite her. So that also helped push the, idea that I was asexual in my head, because now I had two motives to not be happy in a relationship. And now that I had my first girlfriend and I finally managed to tell my parents that I was in a relationship, she talked about how she wanted me to have grandkids. She said it jokingly, but still, you can imagine how much more upset I was, especially since this had been developing for years. If I could have avoided telling my mom that I was in a relationship, I would have. I think that was also the first time I told my mom to fuck off as I stormed out of the room. I also got so close to telling her that there was no way I was having children since I had a vasectomy, but I managed to hold my tongue because I know I want to hold that one for when she really crosses the line, because I know that one's probably going to devastate her. Unless she watches this video, which I hope she doesn't. But if she does, I'm not happy. And of course, I don't remember her ever actually apologizing to me, and I'm pretty sure she doesn't actually care to learn about how I feel. Of course, if she watches this video, she's not gonna really have a choice. Eventually, I graduated. It was a live stream because it was at the end of 2020. I sat and watched it at home, and I honestly thought none of my family was going to show up. But thankfully, my sister came over, and my dad left work early, and my mom was working an hour away at the time, so she called and watched the live stream with us. If they hadn't been there, especially after my conversation with my grandmother, I didn't actually tell you that part. So the story with what happened with my grandma is I was, she paid off my student loans. The entire reason I was finishing college was for her. I was getting so burnt out on college, but when she paid off my student loans, I now felt like I had a responsibility to, and more importantly, now I wanted to. But the problem is when she had Alzheimer's, I received my cap in the mail, and I showed it to her, trying to tell her, "Look, I did it. I graduated. This is what we did together." And it was after she had COVID. I drove her to the hospital, and she eventually got better, came back, but her Alzheimer's was way worse. And so when I showed her, she didn't know what it was. And that's when I hadn't been that sad in so long of my life. It's still hard for me to talk about. Luckily, she's gotten a lot better. Surprisingly, she has good days and bad days, but altogether, she's pretty functional. She made a surprising turnaround. We were surprised she even left the hospital. She doesn't remember that she had COVID. She still has some episodes where she thinks that she's in Kentucky and that she's a high schooler. Or she's like a teenager, and one time she asked where the bathroom is, and we're like, it's around the corner. And she goes, what, it's not outside? Because she grew up on a farm and she was used to an outhouse. So that's a thing we deal with, but otherwise it's not that bad, except for the parts where she had like episodes where she had a lot of anger. She would just lash out at me all the time when I was trying to help her, especially when she was mixing a bunch of chemicals in the sink and I had to pick her up and move her and drain it, and my hand was burning putting my hand in the chemicals. So, but she still was angry at me all the time. I was the one taking care of her all the time, and I was always the bad guy, and I hated it. But now she's better. So if you saw my tweets during that time period and you saw all the things I did, that's why. Anyway, now we're in 2021, and I overdosed on weed during a New Year's party. I was a little lost, but I just kept working, and during this year, I eventually started having a lot more problems with my parents. I'm not sure if I've ever really been happy with my relationship with my parents. My mom and dad would shout and argue a lot. My mom would usually end up crying by the end of it. My mom bought a house behind my dad's back so she could move to Texas and take care of her mom, who was in the middle of being scammed by repeat scam callers. And my mom threw things at my dad during one of the fights because both of them felt like they were being wronged by the other. And both of them thought they were in the right, especially my dad, who always thinks he's in the right for everything. And I can't convince him otherwise, even though I know he's wrong. And there's a lot of problems with my dad because he always told us that if we ever have a problem with anything that we could come to him, but we had to learn that if the problem was him and we needed to talk to him about how he behaved, then that's not an option because he'd just get defensive and angry and start yelling and shut down the conversation. So my sister and I were both pretty scared to ever talk to our parents ever about anything. The only time I actually decided to tell my parents that I was non-binary, that I wanted to be on hormone replacement therapy, is when I had literally no other options. I had tried. I'll get to that later. And I was there to talk to both of them while while my mom was crying and while my dad was angry. At a certain point, I felt like they were using me as a middleman for their bullshit. And once I realized it, I told them I wasn't going to deal with them anymore and they had to work it out themselves. But all of that took place over several years. That was not recent. This was all not recent. And at a certain point, I just assumed this was normal, and I had to eventually realize it wasn't. And it reached a point where my mom and dad were arguing again. I heard my mom suggest they get a divorce. My dad thought it was a bluff, so he agreed to it. And then my mom came upstairs to cry again. But I was actually really excited. I had been wanting them to get a divorce for years. I still do. They never did because they thought staying together would be better for the kids, when really they just argue more, and it was much worse. Oh my god. It was probably better in terms of taxes or something. I don't know. But this year has been really eye-opening for me. Now I'm slowly trying to move toward being independent. I'm starting to realize that if I make certain changes in my life, I'll be able to move out, like selling all of my trading cards and not buying comic books anymore. And really, I'm just selling like all the stuff that's just been sitting around for all this time and pivoting what I want and how I buy things and saving more money. I've always been good about saving money. Now I'm saving a lot more money. And I've been collecting comic books since like the beginning of New 52. So I have a lot of comics. I'm getting some of them graded because I have a lot that are actually super valuable, and I'm planning to sell them too. And it's been these slow changes, and it's with all these slow changes, and now that I'm more confident in my body and with my mind, I'm starting to have more respect for myself. And with that comes no longer wanting to deal with my parents' bullshit. I started getting really sick of always being afraid of my dad. He's had anger issues for my entire life, obviously. And it was even worse since when my sister and I would misbehave, my mom would always force my dad to punish us. So, like, even when he didn't want to be the bad guy, he was still forced to being the bad guy, which made it worse for us because we associated him with being bad. But he was never, physically abusive. Like, don't get that idea in your head. At least I can say that. If I had to describe it, if someone were to ask me if I was afraid of my dad hitting me, I would always say that I know he would never hit me, but I was always afraid he might. It's at this point where I usually start padding my words, telling everyone that even though what I'm saying I might be shocking, but parents, at least my dad, did really try to be good parents. My dad has always been a great provider for the entire family. My dad's always, he would actually push me to be more independent, so much so that in high school, he bought me my first car and even paid it off and put it in my name. And I'm still incredibly grateful for that, even if my car is, even if we need to replace my car now because there's transmission problems and we can't really get it fixed. And especially since the dealership has had it for nearly a month now, and it says it's going to be like 2 to 3 months more before they can get replacement parts and fix it. At this point, it's just easier and probably cheaper to just replace the car. But that doesn't excuse the fact that I'm still not happy, and I haven't been happy with them my whole life. I remember the first time I told my dad I was afraid of him was when I had basically been scammed out of $300 by the dealership for my car when I went to get an oil change, and it's the first time I got an oil change, and I didn't know how much it cost, and so they just upcharged me up to $300, and I didn't have the money, so I had to use his card. Justifiably, he got angry and shouted at me. I mean, like, fair enough. And I went to my room and squatted in the corner and proceeded to have a mental breakdown for maybe about an hour, maybe more. Hard to judge time when you're having a mental breakdown. I didn't move. I was too afraid to move. He came into my room and saw me and realized there was something wrong, but I didn't think it really got through to him that wasn't a one-time thing. This sort of thing has happened multiple times before. It was just the first time he saw me having a mental breakdown. And now he's been listening to podcasts, a lot of which are heavily conservative, and I told my parents that I planned on getting my Adam's apple shaved away, and that's when my dad told me he thinks that this whole LGBTQIA thing is just a trend that I'm falling for, and if I go through with it, I'll be making a mistake. There was, of course, a lot of things about that conversation that were shockingly eye-opening, but recalling the back and forth is difficult because he started shouting and shut down the conversation again. And even though I tried to tell him that this isn't a new thing, that I've wanted to get my Adam's apple shaved away since middle school, but all of my arguments seemed to be ignored because, as usual, he thinks he's in the right about everything and you can't argue with him. And I don't know how to convince him that every step I have taken with changing my body has been heavily calculated. I don't know how to tell him that the only reason I came out to him was because every alternative eventually reached a wall. I don't know how to tell him that I bought sketchy pills online to try to make my body more feminine, or how I would feel better wearing girls' clothing, or how I would sleep with a corset to try and get a curvier waist, or how after the pills stopped working and that I had the very real and serious thought where I considered castrating myself before realizing it would probably be better if I just came out and got on a HRT before I mutilate myself. But it got to that point, I was so afraid to tell them anything about me. But how can I tell him when anytime I try to have a real conversation with him, he shuts me down? He starts shouting again and tells me that I don't know what I'm talking about, and after that conversation, I decided that I'm just not going to talk to about this anymore. Anything I plan to do with my body is my choice. I'm an adult. I have as many freedoms as I can reasonably have. I wanted to talk to them about the surgery to make them more comfortable, but all they care about is taking what they think they know and shoving it down my throat. And I started to realize that my dad and I never really have open conversations anymore. There was a point in my life when I realized I asked him every day how his day was. And it clicked with me that he never asked me how my day was in return. And I decided to test things out by just stop asking him how his day was. And he seemed to not notice. And at a certain point, I stopped, welcoming him home. I just keep doing whatever it is I'm doing. And I still feel guilty about it, even though I know I shouldn't. He never realized, even though I really hoped he would. And that was also a big sign for me. Now I've become so apathetic towards my parents, I don't really care about pursuing a proper relationship with them. All I really care about is moving out. But it's just a slow process. And the rent has skyrocketed in Colorado. And now I have a relationship with someone that's been going really well. So well, she's the first person I told that I love her and felt like I actually meant it. So I don't want to move to another state because I want to stay close to her. I didn't realize how materialistic I was growing up, that trying to sell all the stuff I own is a challenge in itself because there's just so much crap I own. Now that I realize what's been going on, and now that I've slowly been getting over them, so many of the things that I bought and that I was really interested in have no value to me anymore. Like all my comics, all my trading cards, all my art books, etc., etc. All of these things slowly stopped giving me joy. And now I've hit a point where I need to learn to find joy in other things, pursue more experiences than anything else, or work more on my projects and my work. And I started fixing up my books again, and I'm at a point where I'm done obsessing over doing everything right and finding a proper editor and just getting it done and just publishing it. Doesn't matter if it's bad. I don't care anymore. I just want it out there and I want this project to be done. I eventually plan to finish up the first book, put it on my Patreon, and let all of you guys proofread it for me. And even though I'm scared at this new part of my life, I know that I'm right next to making another big change, but this time I want to do it. I think I'm ready. I just need to work out all the details, and I just need to finish planning everything, and I need to finish selling everything, and I need to find probably a roommate. And even though, like, my dad did buy me my first car, it was only because he had to, because both my parents were working, and my sister was going to college, and so the bus system stopped going to our neighborhood, so it was either I get a car or I do not go to school. So of course, he had to get me a car. I mean, don't get me wrong, I understand how insanely privileged that is, regardless of the circumstance. And that's twice in my life I had major financial support, both with the car and with my granny paying off the rest of my student loan. My whole life I've been giving a lot of things that have made my life a lot easier than some others. I still got trauma though, which is really all I can really boil it down to. And saying all this, I'm like, it's hard for me to talk about this because I know I'm so scared to tell you about the privilege that I have because I feel like I'm going to be judged for it, and it always feels like being privileged in this way makes all of my problems that I've had throughout my life inconsequential, when I know that's not right, but my image on the internet is still very important because it's my job. And with my dad always supporting the family, I started feeling bad because he supported everyone. Like, I found out my mom and dad's bank account aren't actually connected and they never merged, and that's been a sore spot for both of them their whole life. And my mom usually throws her money on things that are usually fruitless, like for her failed furniture restoration business or her $8,000 cosmetic dental surgery to shave off some of her gums to make her teeth look bigger, even though, like, why would you want that? What, why are you obsessed with your teeth? That doesn't make any sense. I didn't even notice until you pointed it out. Your teeth were fine. There was also a time where my sister was getting married and my dad was upset that my sister's husband's family wasn't contributing as much money as he was, so we ended up paying for the majority of the wedding. And anyway, it's because my dad had to support so many things that I started focusing more on being financially independent. I started learning how to manage my money a lot better, and I got a really good work ethic, not only because of, high school and college and wanting to pay off my student loans, but also because I legitimately felt bad for him because, I mean, like, I recognize he deserves something better. And in the long run, if I became more financially independent, I could at least make it to where he wasn't supporting me as much, and I could at least do that for him. And when my YouTube channel started really working out, I pushed myself into being more of an adult, and I really wanted YouTube to work since my first job at Carl's Jr. sucked. That was a wild time in itself. Man, before my YouTube channel, I wanted to get a real job since I realized I never had one before. And I didn't want to be one of those annoying privileged kids who had everything taken care of for them. And I got a job when they were desperate. I walked in, did the interview, and they hired me on the spot, which is not a good sign. And there was no training. My first day, my manager put me in front of the cash register in the middle of lunch rush and said, "There's a button for everything, literally everything. There were so many buttons. If you have any questions, ask your coworker who's fresh from Kenya, who still has an accent and it's hard to understand her English." My first customer ordered something, and there were so many buttons on the screen that it took me a long time trying to figure out where to find it. I didn't know what to say, and I was panicking. I kind of froze, and the customer put his money back in his wallet and said, "Never mind, you're terrible," and then walked off. And I was on the verge of crying and almost quitting, but I didn't. I also worked alongside this one guy who was in and out of jail that always talked about how many girls he slept with. I think on the second day of work I came in, he had burned his arm on like one of the fryers. And so like he had major burns, and once the pain went away, he looked at me, saw that I was the new guy, and went, "Lick it," and then started moving it toward me. And I don't know what happened, but I went into not taking any bullshit mode, bitch face, and just grabbed his arm where the wound was fresh, and he reeled back in pain, but he looked at me like he just got a little bit of respect for me, like, "Hey, I guess I can't mess with this guy." And it's like, yeah, especially when you're an idiot like that, like, come on, you have a fresh wound. He eventually went back to jail for stealing a car and driving drunk to a concert. The other bad experience I had was when it was just me and another coworker working at not lunch rush, this was past lunch rush, but we still had another rush, even though we weren't supposed to, but we did. And it was all through the drive-thru. And if you know anything about how fast food chains work, the drive-thru has priority. And there was one customer, one like group of older gentlemen came in and ordered some food, and I took their order, and we were busy. I was busy running back and forth trying to fulfill all the orders and taking new orders and all this stuff. And it's like, eventually my coworker remembered to finish the people's food out in the lobby. I brought them their food, and they said, "Hey, we're missing chili cheese fries." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, sorry, 1 second." And then I had to do another order, and then it was just like, I don't know, maybe 30 minutes, 40 minutes of them just waiting, even though I kept telling my coworker, "It's just chili cheese fries. It's not hard. Can you do it?" And you need to remember that I cannot make the food. I mean, not only was I busy in the front taking the orders, but also you have to take a test in order to handle the food. I think it's like an FDA thing, a health hazard thing. I don't know. It's dumb. After this event, we didn't adhere to that because once, the rush was over, those elderly people were still there, and we finally got their chili cheese fries. I brought it out to them, and they said, "No, you took too long. Take it back." To which I told them, "Sorry, but anything that leaves the counter can't be taken back because it's a health code violation." And then I didn't know what to do, and they weren't talking to me, so I left. And then they eventually went up to my coworker and asked to get the manager, who wasn't there. And so my coworker called the manager, who came in his pajamas to talk to these people. And then my manager told me I had to go apologize to them, even though I don't feel like I did anything wrong. I get why they're angry, but like, come on, did you not see me literally running back and forth, filling out a ton of orders? And then I had to go apologize to them, to which they shouted at me. And ever since then, I realized the only people I see screaming at cashiers are old assholes. And that's also why I tip a lot more than other people. So if I wanted to not be the annoying privileged kid, I definitely got that experience. Because now I know how to respect fast food employees, that's for sure. Anyway, my life can be summarized as elementary school, angry and ostracized, and always sad. Middle school, not as angry, not as ostracized, but still very sad. High school, actually pretty decent time. I made a lot of friends. College, oh my god, if there's ever a time I didn't want to be alive, it is this time. And now post-college, just working and overdosing on marijuana that one time. I talked about it in a live stream. I didn't actually flesh out that story. It was, one of my friends was dumb, and my body doesn't process marijuana that well, so he gave me way too much, and I didn't know what wax was, so yeah, I had too much, and he kept handing it to me, and I was nervous at my first party, so of course I was gonna just have some, because that's what he handed it to me. What else am I gonna do? And then I overdosed, and I was gonna vomit, but I didn't somehow. I was dizzy all the time. God, just, geez. Now I know how much I can handle. And also being in an incredibly healthy relationship now. It's nice. That part's really nice. If you made it this far into the video, then please don't tell my family about this video. You can probably tell my sister though. She's awesome. It's funny because my dad and his brother didn't get along at all, and so when my dad was having a second child, he was horrified that me and my sister would have the same problems that he and his brother did, but turns out we got along so well. Except for that one time she tried to smother me with a pillow. But that was when we were toddlers and she didn't know what we were doing, and I'm pretty sure she just wanted me to stop making so much noise. And my mom ran in, just like sixth sense, like, oh my gosh, something's wrong, and then took her off of me, and I didn't die, but there was that one time. Especially since both of us are scared to talk about our parents, about important things, it's easy to talk to each other because we were like the only ones we could talk to, so we got very close to each other. We both got trauma. But thanks for watching this video. If you watch this with ad block, you are contractually obligated to support me on Patreon for the month. You can also follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Thanks for watching. Stay beautiful. Keep playing.